Hey friends, before we get to the next interview, I just want to say thank you to those of you who have prayed for this podcast and supported us financially. When we started doing these in-person interviews, we knew it was going to be a big undertaking and that it was going to cost a lot of money. And it has, but it's been so worth it because every week I'm hearing from more and more people who are benefiting from these interviews that we get to offer for free because of the support that we get from people like you. If you'd like to become part of our support team, there are multiple ways that you can do that. You can join Patreon, locals, and tax-deductible donations can be given through our website. All the links are below. Please pray about becoming a supporter, my friends. Now, let's get to the next interview. I'm not really sure how to start this interview other than to let those of you watching know that this is an interview unlike any other interview I've ever done, because we're sitting here today with someone who I've known since I was, I think, 18 or 19 years old, someone who's known me before I even went into ministry, someone who's known me before I even knew my wife, and has seen every stage of my life. And when I became Catholic, of course, that changed a lot of things. And we're going to talk about a lot of this stuff, but this isn't about me. This is about his story. And I've shared with many of you about his journey, sometimes with you through different things, and then even like with Matt on Pints with Aquinas, you heard me talk about this friend of mine who was this pastor who had this incredible journey to the Catholic Church. And he's here with me tonight in my home. So I want to welcome my good friend, Mr. Aaron Gunsaulus. His wife, Cami, is also here, who I've known Cami longer than I've known you.
You have. You look so young in that picture that we have of you guys at church camp together, but I can't even place when that was.
It was 1985.
85.
My first year of summer games, church camp. Someone sent me that picture. I don't know where it is, but I was looking through it and I'm like, hey, there's Cami. So I was 11 years old.
I was 14.
Yeah.
11.
So we go way back, clearly. We've already established that. But man, you're also, by the way, you're in my book. Did you know that? You're in the Convert's Guide?
Yes.
Yeah.
You let me know that at one point.
Yes. If anyone's read that chapter about my Reformed friend who was in the cage phase, who wouldn't stop yakking about Reformed theology, that's you.
Yes.
Ha!
This means I now get royalties.
Okay. Well, it also means you have to help pay for some of the expenses then if you're going in on that. So
I'll talk to my people.
Talk to you. Yeah, you do that. But man, it's so good to have you here. We weren't going to do this for a few months.
I think after the new year is what you were talking about.
Well, yeah, because I wanted to be respectful of your journey and your timeline. And, we've all talked about how when someone becomes Catholic, there's this initial excitement, but there's oftentimes a need to just rest and experience life as a Catholic, because as you're learning, as I learned, there's a different reality from learning about Catholicism to being Catholic. And sometimes if you add into the mix of that, things like telling your story and writing books, doing all these things, it can really muddy the waters a little bit. So my priest told me, take a year and do nothing other than just be Catholic. So I was trying to honor that with you. But you had to go and mess it up by putting a viral post on X that talked about what's been happening with people around you. And I don't know, I'm kind of not sure how we should begin this timeline. But what I think we should do is start there.
Okay. We're
going to do how when we saw Rush, they started at the end and they played backwards. We're going to kind of do that.
Yes. Are we playing a game with how many times we reference Rush in this?
I don't know. We're both Rush nerds, but anyway, talk about that post. What was that all about?
Well, what it was about, and first of all, if there's anybody on this planet who would not be able to orchestrate a viral post, it's me. So all I did was made a post. So what was going on was it was a Saturday. I believe it was around 10 o'clock in the morning. A lot was going on, lots of things to do at home, inside and outside. And that night we were going to church, and we were going in the mid-afternoon. We were going to go to confession. Then we were going to stick around. And that night at Saturday night mass at 5 o'clock, we were sponsoring several of our friends and their kids who were coming into the church. And it was a big group. We weren't sponsoring all of them, but between the two of us, Cami and me, we were sponsoring 7 people. There were 17 people coming in, and depending on how you count it, because I've been asked about this, there were 16 people being confirmed, but there's another child that came in with his family who was just not quite old enough to be confirmed. But then behind, in those doing the sponsoring, the sponsors, 2 of them were husbands of 2 of the women who were sponsoring their wives, and they were both reverting or had reverted. So it was kind of 19. But
Wow.
so I just made a post, just a quick summary of it's been a wild year. Resigned as a pastor. We entered the Catholic Church at the Easter Vigil, and Cami and me, my wife Cami and me, with 2 of our kids. And tonight we're sponsoring some of our best friends coming into the church, a total of 17 people, or however I worded it. And then I just said, if you have a second, wish them a welcome home, and I was going to share that with them that night at the meal afterwards. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I bet I can get 50 or 100 people to wish them welcome home. And to increase my odds, I posted it in a community on X, Catholic Twitter or something like that, or whatever it's called. And so I just think, okay, this should do it. And I noticed that I'm getting a little more traction for a while, but I'm busy at home, not paying any attention really to my phone. And we went to church, we went to confession, we started talking with our friends who were excited and bringing food in. And I always turn my phone off for Mass. I turned it off early that night. And off we went into Mass, and the night just unfolded. After Mass, a lot of time talking afterwards in the gathering space, and eventually we made it into the center where we were eating. And finally then, while I was waiting for it to be time to go through the food line, I turned on my phone. And so this is about 7:00, I think, that night. And the first thing I see is a text from you. Your post blew up on X. I'm like, what? It went super viral. And at that time, I think you said it's got 109,000 views or something like that. And I just looked real quick and scrolled through it. It's about at 140 by the time I look at it an hour later. And from there, it just kept going. And I didn't pay much attention while I was still there. But when I got home and could finally just kind of sit back and take in the night, because it was an awesome night, but sit at home and just kind of start to unwind a little bit and look and see what was going on. I've never experienced anything like that. It was madness. All the notifications, all the messages, 50 to 100. I mean, way, way beyond that. But just all the notifications and all the love and all the support, I forgot to even tell them that, there with so much was going on, but, we connected over time and someone saw it and they were texting me that night and it was going back and forth and we were just blown away that night. But yeah, so I was just trying to, make the night a little more special, if that's even possible, for our friends. And but there were other plans, I guess, at play, and it just blew up on X.
Yeah, and then someone actually went to Facebook and found the video.
Yes.
And put the video on there. And I haven't checked in a while, but I think it was over 500,000 views about last time I checked.
Okay, that one might have been. I haven't checked that one recently.
So it just completely blew up, which of course, led to people reaching out to you about doing stuff. And I'm like, well, okay, I guess we're doing this now.
Yeah.
So here we are. I mean, people love to wish new Catholics that welcome home greeting, and it's so powerful. But when they see 17 people coming in and then they think, how did this happen? From this Protestant pastor who became Catholic, this kind of thing happened, Then people started connecting the dots with different things that we talked about. And now, man, it's absolutely amazing. So I guess what we need to talk about really, because I think what we should do is maybe back up now and talk just about your upbringing and your faith journey and then how all this came, because you are the least likely guy that anybody would ever expect to become Catholic. I mean, of all the people when I became Catholic that I was like worried about, you were at the top of the list. And when I say worried, I mean like that you were going to like flip out. Not like in a emotional way, but just like intellectually, because you'd be like, no way, Keith, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But how did you end up coming to Christ? What was your faith journey like?
I grew up in the church. I grew up in a Lutheran church. Whatever the ELCA was before it was the ELCA, I think it had a different acronym then, slightly
Evangelical Lutheran Church of America.
That's the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. I think it was called something else when I was growing up in it, but that's what it is today. And I grew up there, went through confirmation there. So Sunday school, youth group, did all the things. And I enjoyed it. I liked church. I had good friends there, a lot of fun in youth group, went to my own church camp as well when I was probably junior high. But I don't think it ever really took root. In fact, I know it didn't. While I enjoyed being there, it wasn't really something that I took possession of. I didn't take charge of it in my own heart or anything like that. And when I no longer had to go, I didn't go. And fast forward a few years, I'm graduated, I'm at college, and I wasn't going anywhere to church. And I would say I believed in general, I believed in God, and I would have said I believe in the Christian God. I would have said that I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. But it was a faith of just, simple intellectual assent, the stuff that I had been taught, and which all made reasonable enough sense to me. But it didn't take root, as I said. But a lot of ups and downs in college. In the early 90s, I was feeling pretty directionless. And I was reconnecting with a friend who I didn't know anything about his journey, but he had been with Campus Crusade for Christ. And he wanted me to come over and he wanted to tell me about all that he'd been doing. And since this is something we'd never talked about, I suspect that might be a contest between who was more nervous to talk to me, him or you, when you were going to become Catholic, or him just saying, hey, I'm a Christian, I've been with Campus Crusade for Christ, because that was never on our radar. These weren't the things we talked about. But he started telling me, and I said, where were you all summer? Because this was right at the beginning of semester in fall, 92. And he said, well, I was in Hawaii on a mission trip, which, come on, Hawaii on a mission trip.
The suffering.
Yes. But he had been there with Campus Crusade for Christ. And he said, and I was out on the beaches telling people about Jesus. And something happened to me when he said that. That's all the further he got. And at that moment, all of the lack of direction, tire spinning that I'd been doing in college. I was there. I had a major. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had gone to college simply because that's what you do. But I was, my life was without really any purpose, and in some ways maybe a little bit dark too. But something happened there, and I knew I needed to drop out of college. I needed to go home and get with some Christian friends and get my life straightened out and get right with Jesus. That's, in simple terms, that's all I knew to think about then. And so I had a really radical conversion experience there. And it's not like he told me later, he said, I didn't even get to the point where I presented the gospel to you, which would have been, like the 4 spiritual laws or something like that. But, all of that was there from those years going to church, I think it started to come back to me then. It was stuff that was there. It was latent. I knew it. I'd never embraced it, but I started to that night. It started to take root. And that's what I did. I dropped out of college. My mom thought I'd lost my mind, and I moved home, and I started going to a different church with friends, and that's where I met Cami at the Methodist church in our hometown. So from there, I start reading the Bible for the first time. I'd read the Bible when told to in Sunday school classes and that. I started reading for myself, really absorbing it, reading like Old Testament in the morning, New Testament at night, or something like that. I had a reading plan at any rate. And as I'm reading it, I find that it's not like I'm hearing it for the first time. In the Lutheran Church, they use the lectionary. And so many different readings from Scripture I'd been exposed to for 15, 16 years. And all of those, I realized they're still there. and it all came kind of flooding back in, and I just kind of developed a mind for the scriptures. I was able to remember verses. I was able to remember where things were. I'm not saying I was a scholar. I was still just a babe. I didn't know, but I was absorbing it in a way that, one, I wouldn't have thought possible, but two, in a way that made pastors kind of take note. And so it wasn't long before I started being encouraged by whatever pastors were in my life, depending on where I was when I went back to college or being home. Every one of them started encouraging me to go to seminary, to be a pastor, because I love the scriptures, I love to teach it. So that was kind of the trajectory from growing up in the church and not really caring that I was in the church to now I'm feeling like I'm being called to being a pastor of a church.
And I think that's kind of when our paths intersected was
Yes.
at that time at the Methodist Church, because I had moved to the town where you were. We started hanging out, going to church, playing music and all that stuff. And I just remember you being a guy that was just a little bit different level when it came to the level of seriousness that you had around your faith than what I had at the time. I mean, I was fired up about Jesus, but like I wasn't a scripture nerd like you were, and I remember feeling like, yeah, Aaron is going to be a pastor someday. There's some kind of call on your life for that. And then I remember when you guys got married and you went off to seminary, and then we kind of parted ways. Like I moved out to Philly and all that kind of went down. But I remember coming back for some kind of event or something. I don't know. I think I was youth pastor and we were at the YMCA in Newton for like this youth retreat. And I remember you coming in going, we need to talk, man. And you had this book. You were so fired up. R.C. Sproul,
Yeah.
Chosen by God. And it was like you had just discovered, the keys to the kingdom or something. You had figured it out. You had cracked the code of what the Bible means. And
Nobody has ever been a Christian before they read that book.
so we're talking about, this idea of like Reformed theology, Calvinism and everything. I'd never heard of it really before that too much, but you were just so all in on that. And I remember thinking, okay, like, all right, this is interesting. But what was that like for you going from sort of just generic Christian to like uber Reformed Christian?
It wasn't like I wasn't looking for it to begin with. It kind of happened. The way it happened was because I had been in a Sunday school class in Cedar Falls, Waterloo. We were both up at UNI, and there was a little back and forth with a guy in that class, and we were given the platform to do this, by the way, by the pastor, and talking about, I believe the topic of discussion was whether or not you could lose your salvation. And he was Reformed. So it wasn't a Reformed Baptist church, but he was a Reformed Baptist, the pastor. Yeah. And the other guy that I was kind of dialoguing with was also a Reformed Baptist. And I think the pastor kind of figured that he was setting me up because I was the one who wasn't fully on board. I could see certain things, but I just couldn't see at all that you couldn't walk away, if you chose to. And so he set up this dialogue for Sunday school, and through that, I can't remember his name, but this young man who I think might have been a college student or just graduated, kind of persuaded me, largely on the system of Reformed theology, the 5 points, often called TULIP, just kind of worked through that, and I thought, that actually makes sense. And so that started a process. I ended up reading R.C. Sproul, and that's how I latched onto that particular doctrine, and then also that particular theological system of how one is saved and whether or not one can walk away.
I think that's an interesting system. First of all, I just want to say, of all the Protestant guys I wish were on our team, R.C. Sproul is at the top of my list. I just love the way that guy teaches. Yeah. I love the way he breaks things down. And I disagree with him fundamentally, of course. He's passed on now, but There was just something about that guy, the way that he would put things that connected, I think, with guys in our generation.
He was a great teacher. He had a great personality.
Mm-hmm.
He was great at telling stories to make a point. He was great at illustrations, something I never was as a pastor, honestly. That was one of my weak points as a pastor, because I'm analytical. As I think about things, I don't think about the illustrations of them. But he was great at all of it, and he had a lot of charisma as a teacher. And yeah, he could make the points and make them convincing and make it appealing. So you're right. He was a great teacher.
Yeah, and when you find people who become like enamored with Reformed theology, it's almost like they've discovered this extra layer of Christianity that if you become part of that group, now it's sort of like the secret handshake, okay.
Yeah.
We understand these things in a way that other people don't. And I think that there is just a tendency, I think, for all of us to want to find that type of thing one way or another. Pentecostals might look at that like, well, are you born again? Have you been fire baptized? What? Mm-hmm. Like, there seems to be that thing. Maybe for some of the more mainline denominational people, it's more about social justice and, well, have you understood the real point of the gospel is to take care of the poor, or whatever. But like when it comes to the Reformed guys, I feel like it's interesting. On one hand, I think they're the least likely to become Catholic, but on the other hand, I think they're the most likely to become Catholic. And here's why. And maybe we could get into some of how that intersected with you. I think they're most likely to become Catholic because they have a very high view of Scripture, and they have a high view of the church, and they have a high view of truth. There isn't like this wishy-washiness. It's like doctrine is doctrine, and we want to pursue the truth no matter what it is, and of authority ultimately.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. It's just, it seems at times to be so, their direction seems to be the opposite of Catholicism, but really that way of thinking and approaching theology kind of lines up a little bit with some things associated with Catholicism.
There's a lot in common. Both there's the commitment to Scripture, there's the commitment to doctrine. People like me who I was a convert to Reformed theology. I don't find that same temperament is there from most people who grew up in it. Mm-hmm. They tend to be a little more grounded, but there's a reason why we call that the cage stage. When you discover it, you get so excited about it that you can tend to beat people up with it in your exuberance rather than just kind of lovingly let it digest and process and then kind of walk people through it. But you get so excited about it, you want to, why can't you be reformed like I am? And you kind of go a little bit ballistic like that. I don't find that same thing for the most part with Reformed people who just kind of grew up with it. It's what they've known. They went through their own catechism classes because that's a thing. It's part of the whole experience. So there is that. But I think I was of this category of people who finds it, then gets excited about it, and then kind of goes crazy about it. But you're right. There is still that. Yeah. So you're maybe unlikely to ever even consider becoming Catholic because the system you've embraced is fundamentally opposed to Catholicism. Right. And yet you have so many approaches, so many general things in common in terms of how important Scripture is, how important doctrine is. You have confessions, you have catechisms, you have creeds. There's a lot of common ground there, at least in a general sense. It's not, it's not like an independent Baptist church or non-denominational or something like that, which isn't to malign them. I'm just saying there's a greater distance there in how you live out and experience Christianity than there is between Reformed Christianity and Catholicism.
So when you became a pastor and you started doing ministry, was there ever a point when some of that Reformed theology bumped up against reality in a way that made you question it? Or was your Reformed theology something that you held on to up until you decided to become Catholic? Or were you starting to see problems with it before that is what I'm asking?
I think I held on to it for most of the time. If I ever saw anything that would potentially be a problem, I mean, there's a way to explain that within the system, depending on what the problem is. There are things, I think every Reformed person who thinks deeply about it and who is wanting to be honest about it would maybe bump up against that very topic. That was the thing that ended up convincing me, or kind of being the last domino for me to become Reformed, is when you've known someone who, if you're supposed to judge them by their fruit, all the fruit that you're aware of, all the fruit you can see, not that it's perfect and flawless, but it tells you, here's a Christian. And when all of a sudden something happens, or maybe not all of a sudden, but at any point, when it gets to the point where, if it gets to the point where now, where's the fruit? There seems to have been a real walking away. There can be a little bit of maybe cognitive dissonance there when it comes to trying to make sense of, because then you have to start asking questions. Was that person ever a Christian? Or is it they were and are, and of course always will be, and at some point they're just obviously going to come back. But ultimately you can't know that for sure, because the elect and who they are that's not something you can see as a person perfectly into. You can look at the indicators of their fruit, but when something happens and the fruit was there and now there's a completely different way of that life is being lived out by that particular person, that can start to raise that question. You want to make sense of it, and the system gives you ways to make sense of that, the Reformed system. But sometimes it doesn't seem to make as much sense as you'd like it to. And it's kind of like, I use this analogy a lot. I got it from another pastor, but you want, with Reformed people in general, and maybe with me in particular, you want to be able to pack up your suitcase, get all your clothes in there, and it's over full, but you're packing it up and you close it. You don't want a sleeve hanging out one side of it. You want it all packed nice and neat in the suitcase. But it's more often than not that there actually is part of a sleeve hanging out somewhere, and you just try to do your best to make sense of that.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. And that's one of my struggles with that line of thinking, that, well, if you're a genuine Christian, you will never walk away. Because we all know people who've walked away.
Yeah.
Everybody does. So it puts you in this weird situation where you have to say either that person was never genuinely a Christian in the first place, which that bumps up against our experience a lot. We go, well, then wait a minute. They seem to be. They said they were. Then you turn that inward and go, well, how do I know that I'm not just? They deceived themselves. They're either lying to themselves or lying to everybody else. Which, of course, can invite you to self-reflect on that and go, well, how do I really know? Which gets into all of that. But I think that's just one of those things that sleeve dangling out is pretty, I don't know, it's out there, man.
It is, and it's hard, but I can just say for me, that conversion experience I told you about, I was not seeking the Lord then. I wasn't pursuing Jesus. I wasn't going to this friend of mine. I didn't even know he'd been with Campus Crusade. It was like the Lord found me. Mm-hmm. Now, you can make sense of that in other systems besides the Reformed system of theology. But when I came across Reformed theology, it seemed to make really good sense of that. And so you look on that, and, while Reformed people might at times in some ways diminish the value of experience, it's not as though experience doesn't matter at all. And looking through that lens of my own experience, it just seemed to make really good sense out of a guy who was, I don't know if it'd be fair to say rock bottom, but for me personally, it might have been something of a rock bottom. And I came out of that reconnection with this friend, dropping out of college and going home and knowing I needed to get my life right with Jesus. So it kind of made sense in that. So those are the kinds of things that would keep me grounded, I guess, enough where I didn't do a lot of the self-reflecting that you're talking about, where I'm questioning, maybe I'm not, maybe I could, maybe my conversion and my faith isn't genuine. I didn't really do that, and probably to my detriment, because you're supposed to examine yourself, but it's like, well, look what happened, look where I was and look what happened overnight. And I wasn't looking for that. I wasn't seeking the Lord then. So, it confirmed the system, and I knew that the Christian life is a struggle no matter what. But it's one thing to have struggles here and there, to have weaknesses, but to have someone just up and walk away, that was just a different deal to me. But, God will preserve you from fully and finally falling away, says the doctrine of perseverance of the saints. And I just accepted that was true. And in my sin, I wouldn't get to that point. And my confidence wasn't in myself. My confidence was in Jesus, who had given me such a dramatic conversion experience when I wasn't even looking for him. So that's kind of where I was on that at the time.
So in the middle of your ministry, like, I don't know if middle, but you have 6 kids.
Yes.
Right? So you have a big family. You wind up pastoring this Christian Reformed church in the town that you're from. I don't want to dox you necessarily.
Yeah,
so
I'm the worst. I'm the absolute worst at that. I will probably dox both of us before this is over.
Yeah.
So.
Well, everybody knows where I live, so it's no big deal. But anyway, you're in Iowa. You're not too far from us.
Shh.
So you're just going through life doing this ministry thing, and then your crazy friend becomes Catholic, and you probably thought that was nuts. But at that point in time, like, you and I weren't really hanging out that much. I mean, life had happened. We were kind of just, we just grew apart distance-wise, but it was interesting. Like, I never felt like you and I weren't good friends.
No.
I always felt like we were brothers, we were really good friends. Just we would go, maybe a year or even more without really talking to each other because we're dudes probably. But
I think it was that, and I think it was the fact that there came a point where we both have young children.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing our own family things, and we're just far enough apart that our lives don't really naturally intersect in any way.
Yeah.
It's not, let's get the young kids and go meet. I mean, where are we going to meet? What are we going to do? One of us drives 2 hours, at one point, now you're a little closer. You're getting there. I'm
working.
Yeah. But even when we're an hour and a half or whatever, hour and 20 minutes apart, at that point, we've kind of been out of contact long enough that it's just not natural that we get together and hang out. Not because of any hostility or animosity. As you said, life happened. And I think that's what happened.
Yeah. So I will ask you though, when, and I don't remember how you found out that I became Catholic, but I don't remember if I told you or if you just saw it somewhere or whatever, because I didn't do the whole, hey, everybody, guess what? I'm Catholic, like on Facebook or anything like that. But what was that like for you to hear that happened to me? Was it surprising to you, or were you, because I remember years ago, back when I first talked with Devin about this, I remember talking to you about this going, I'm starting to learn about Catholicism. And to be honest with you, you were one of those guys that was supposed to save me from being Catholic. I thought, okay. And I remember asking you some questions about it, but I don't know if you even really remember that or whatever. But I remember talking to you about it, kind of going, I think I'm a little interested in this. You were just like, yeah, that's ridiculous. But that was a long time ago. But when you finally heard that I did become Catholic, and I guess I've never asked you this question before, but like, what did you think? You can tell me the truth.
Okay. Well,
just between us.
I'll tell you the truth. It's just you and me.
Yeah.
Okay. The truth is, as I remember it, and refresh, that's 2017 we're talking, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So as I remember it, I guess I felt, I was kind of unsurprised, but disappointed. Unsurprised because you already seemed to have been on that trajectory anyway. And it's not like you and I had checked in with each other very often, so there's not just a geographical space between us. There's a little bit of a relational space between us, not because we tried to put that, not because we were angry at each other or anything like that. We just lost touch, And so when I found out, I think I was just kind of like, well, I guess that figures, but I don't even know why in the world he would do that. it's kind of like I couldn't accurately say I saw this coming, but I guess I just kind of felt like that was what was going to happen, because I didn't really have any data to the contrary. We weren't really interacting that much, and honestly, I have no memory of what I would have seen or not seen from you on Facebook or anything like that. I just don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, I remember at one point in time, we had talked about a few different things here and there. I mean, I'd seen you here and there. And I remember at one point in time, you said to me, Keith, we're going to have to talk about this.
But was that afterwards?
That was after I became Catholic.
Yeah.
Okay. You said, Keith, we are going to have to talk about this. Because I think I went to see you when my mom was sick, and we talked about that a little bit. And we had just kind of bumped into each other a few times here and there. And I mentioned it to you, and I always wondered, like, well, what's Aaron thinking about this, whatever. And I remember you just said, well, we are going to talk about this sometime. And I thought, yeah, I'm sure we will. By that time I'd been used to talking about it with people, but so I was just like, okay. But it was different with you because we've known each other for so long. And I've always thought of you as like this, this guy who was on another level in terms of your knowledge of Scripture, your knowledge of the faith. So almost kind of like, in a sense, like big brother in the faith to me, to where it's like, all right, how am I going to explain this to Aaron? What's he going to say? I know he's not going to like this, but I also was say this. I was never worried that you weren't going to be my friend.
Yeah.
I was never worried about that, but, so I just found it kind of interesting when a couple of years later or a few years later, I don't even know, you started commenting on my videos.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what happened when I said that we need to talk about this sometime. I think at that point it was kind of my whatever hostility had been there. It really wasn't anymore, I don't think anyway, simply because in my time as a pastor, and just watching trends in culture and different things, I was becoming more and more convinced that Christians in general need to start standing together more than being at each other's throats.
Yeah.
And I think I was applying that in this case too, though I still would have thought of Catholicism as borderline in some way, at that time. It's not like I'd given it deep thought. But by that time, my whole thing that I'm really driven by is biblical literacy. Mm-hmm. As a pastor, that's one of the main things that I wanted to pass on, to teach, really just teach the Scriptures in their fullness, tie in the old with the new, and these types of things. So my demeanor was much more peaceful than it had been back when we first talked, when you were considering becoming Catholic. But with your videos, again, I'm not 100% sure, but I think probably what happened is I saw you posting stuff on Facebook or whatever. And we'd banter back and forth every now and then, whether it was something about music or something. It's not like there was no contact.
Yeah, sure.
But it wasn't really church stuff contact. That's not what we had. And at some point, I don't know if you'd posted a video that you'd made or something like that, probably one called "Once Saved, Always Saved" is garbage or something like that.
My favorite one, man.
But I guess at one point I just decided to watch one. And so I started commenting and very determined to not be combative. It wasn't my goal. But just to be reasonable. And of course I disagreed with you, about pretty much everything, I guess.
Sure.
But I wanted to be peaceful. I wanted to be present, in your comments, I guess. But not in a way where I was trying to troll you or anything like that. That's not what I wanted to do. So yeah, I just started dropping comments, and I don't know, I guess we just started interacting a little bit more after that.
Well, it's weird because I don't know if people pick this up from you in this interview, but you're a hilarious guy who our sense of humors are very like dry and sarcastic to each other. So like
I'm having a hard time trying to have a serious conversation with you right now.
So when honestly, like, but you're also like an intense guy when it comes to like all this Bible stuff. So I remember saying to Stell, I'm like, Aaron's commenting on my videos. And she's like, well, what's he saying? And I said, well, he didn't say anything bad, but I can't tell if that's like if he's like at another level of intellect that I just don't understand that I'm being slammed.
That's probably the case.
You know? So I'm like, I don't know. Something's going on here. And then it kept happening. It was like, you were regularly commenting on these videos, but it wasn't like to destroy me. But I remember then it wasn't long after that you reached out to me and said, hey, let's get together and have lunch. And that's when I thought, this is it.
Yes.
You know, I'm like, he's setting me up.
You've told me that.
He's getting me ready for this. And now we're going to go eat lunch somewhere. So when you and I met at that Mexican restaurant halfway, I walked into that meeting with you like, you know, I don't want to say like ready to throw down, but like I was brushed up. I remember telling Stella, I'm like, I got to brush up on a bunch of apologetic stuff. So I had books with me. I had stuff. I was like, okay, we're going to do this. You know, we're going to have this conversation and I'm ready. And I remember like when we got together, it just felt good to hang out, but you shut that whole thing down like almost immediately. And I remember you said to me, Keith, I just want to apologize. You've always been right about everything. No, I'm kidding.
That can be edited out.
Yeah. No, but you literally said to me, you said, Keith, I just want you to know that something to the effect of, I'm not the person that you think that I was before. Like when it comes to this stuff, that I'm not here to argue with you. I'm not here to like, you know, tell you you're wrong or whatever. I just want to talk. And I was like, okay, what are we doing here? You know, what was going through your mind at that point in time? Is it really just kind of what you said about we can't be at each other's throats, or was there more to it than that?
I would say relationally, what was going through, well, I mean, this is 2023 by now, I think.
Yeah.
So May of 2023, boy, a lot has happened by that time. I mean, I don't know. That could go layers here, but just for that moment.
Yeah, we'll back up to that stuff, but I want to just kind of capture that moment here for a minute.
In that moment, the interaction online, I've enjoyed it. Eager to get together and catch up. Eager to hear about what you're doing, but also at a point where I'm accepting that there are just depths to the faith that I don't know, I don't understand. And, you know, anybody at my previous church, if they ever happen to watch this, will know that something I said frequently is that so much of what we confess, I mean, we hold it, we confess it, we believe it, but we have to understand that there are just things that we can't fully wrap our mind around. No matter how tight our theology is, there are still mysteries. And I was very much in a place where I was wanting to kind of recapture mystery a little bit. So I would talk about Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong to the Lord, but the revealed things belong to us and to our children forever. But just an acceptance that there are those secret things. There are those unrevealed things that, and we have to leave room for that mystery. We have to leave room to not have it all figured out. And I'm someone who, in and of myself, I'm wired to have it all figured out. I'm very A-type. I want to connect all the dots. I don't like loose ends. I want everything tied up nice and neat. I want every sleeve in the suitcase. And I was just getting to a point where I hope it was maturing, where I was having to accept that, well, it turns out I don't have God's knowledge of things, and not everything's going to be tied up nice and neat. So it's with that spirit, with that sense of putting aside some of the old things that I might have wanted to fight about. I'd become, a lot of the fight was out of me by that time, I guess. Maybe in some bad ways, but I think also in some good ways. And I didn't want to fight anymore. And so I was just looking forward to reconnecting. That was it.
Yeah.
That was the whole thing. But our last contact, I mean, real contact, not online, not just happened to be, passing through the same spot briefly or something like that, but just hanging out type of contact was probably me being really belligerent towards you about being a Catholic, or something like that. I don't know.
I don't think you ever were. I think that we never really got there because of the distance.
Yeah.
But I felt like it was coming. But so when we got together and you were in this place, I could just sense something was different in you. So talk a little bit about what was going on behind the scenes in ministry for you between, that time in 2017 when I became Catholic and we kind of ran into each other a little bit. And then 2023, in those years, a lot of stuff happened for you in ministry. Where was your heart at with regard to that?
Well, a lot of stuff happened to everybody in 2020.
That is true.
And so in that sense, my experience is not unique. It was hard no matter where you were. It was hard in churches everywhere, and it was a kind of a perfect storm year with COVID and with being an election year, just a really hot election year. And everybody was just kind of on edge, about things, myself included. But church life became really, really awful for me just through that whole COVID experience. And again, not just for me. I'm not trying to single myself out as I experienced something that nobody else did, but it was like one day, there were arguments that were happening about stuff having to do with COVID and decisions that you make as a church and how you're going to go forward. And it's like they just didn't stop, for a year or so. And so that was one thing. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail about that, but just that it was really hard. It felt like there was always an argument, even if it wasn't being actively had, It was still lingering in the background. It wasn't over. And we always knew that it was going to fire up again at some point. And so I just kind of, I spent a lot of time really angry about stuff, about just the way things were and some of those struggles within church, whether it was leadership or the body or whatever. And some of those things, I was a part of those, I contributed to that as well. I recognize that, but it just got really hard and really tiresome to me. And I mean, physically tiring to me, late night meetings, unable to sleep because of thinking about this, that, or the other thing that was going on or decision that had to be made or whatever it was. Also during that time, there's a point at which, at some point in 2020, if you mark a year and I think a little bit more, maybe 14 months or something like that, there was a time period in the midst of that where in our church of probably about 120 people at that point, oldest to youngest, 120 total, there were 12 deaths in the church, which is a lot. And getting the calls for the funerals and doing all that, I'm already feeling like my energy is completely depleted. My emotional energy, my physical energy. And whenever you have situations like that, it requires energy out of you. You know this. It's just part of being a pastor. You give of yourself into those things, into those situations, and you do it in situations of joy as well. You give of yourself, and it draws out of you when you do that. That's part of it. And you give of yourself in times of sorrow and tragedy, and it draws out of you. And that, but during that time, it was like there was nothing putting it back in.
Yeah.
It was just a constant draining that was going on. But I'm a guy, so you tough it out, you get through it, you press on to the next day, and you do your best. And I'm not the only one who's in the midst of a situation that there's no playbook for,
Everybody was.
Yeah. It's not like we had the answers, but when you try to give a helpful answer, if you run into challenges on that, and fights over and that, you couldn't win. It was like you couldn't win.
Yeah, it was like that, and what a lot of people that are watching this may not realize is that because we live in the Catholic world, we have bishops that decide everything for us. There's you're not going to your local priest going, hey, why aren't you doing this? Or what? Maybe you are, but really, he's being obedient to his bishop, who's being obedient to his authority. But when you have these small denominations or these local churches that are more on their own, the pastor's the one who's going to get chewed out for one reason or another by it's just pick your poison. If you do this group's mad at you. If you do that, what they want, the other group's mad at you. And it's like there's this complete sense of hopelessness from the standpoint of being able to please everybody, especially when the whole world's coming apart and nobody really knows what to do.
And it's such a low trust time too because of the election. Everybody's suspicious about everybody else's motives because it's so contentious on the election front. It was one thing after another. But so our church government is what's called a Presbyterian government, where we have local officers, pastor, which was me. I was the only one. We have elders and we have deacons. And we're having to try to make the decisions about how to do this. And these are good people we're really trying to do the right thing, but just sometimes the right thing isn't somebody else's right thing, and that's just how it was. And not that everything that we determined was right was necessarily right, but we were trying to do what we could do and what was best for the congregation in the midst of unprecedented situations. That's what we were dealing with in that. And then with the deaths that were, in the congregation too, that added a layer for me and of course for other families in the church. And then at the end of 2021 is when kind of another layer was added, because that's when Cami's dad died. And that was really unexpected because while her parents were both older in their 80s, he was not in as poor health as her mom was. But it was kind of a freak accident in the home, and it ended up in a pneumonia situation, and he ended up passing away unexpectedly. And when that happened, so he was basically taking care of his wife, Cami's mother. But when he died, and they were in an apartment in a like a retirement community. When he died, she couldn't live alone. My mother-in-law could not live alone. So she went into the nursing home that was attached with that retirement community. And there's Cami has an older sister, about 11 years older, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, who has a mental disability. So at the time when Cami's dad dies, her mom goes into a nursing home and Cami becomes the legal guardian of her older sister. And that came with a whole world of stuff that we didn't know anything about. The reporting, the filing, just all the different things that we had to be aware of that were now her responsibility because her mom couldn't do it anymore. And so now a lot of my attention is being given to tracking down accounts that I didn't even know existed, just stuff like that, because you have to report assets because she's on Title 19. So the state wants to know what money does she have. And so there's trusts involved. There's all kinds of stuff, and we just don't know anything about it. And so we're having to figure this out on the fly. And because we can't go to her mom and ask because she doesn't remember anything. She's in the early onset of dementia. So I spent a lot of my time just trying to work on all the details of that. Her family, deaths in the church, the lingering, it's hard to remember, but man, in 2021, it took a while before we were even feeling like, are things normal now? Are we, no one really, everyone's still using the phrase new normal, but nobody quite knows what it is or if we're even there at whatever it is. And so it's all of that stuff was packaged together starting in 2020, but it extended on into 2021 for me. And then with beyond that, because her dad died near the end of the year of 2021, I spend most of 2022 trying to figure out this guardianship stuff. And, and then just with her mom's gradual decline. So there was a lot of stuff going on. Before you and I get together in 2023, there's a lot of stuff that I've gone through, and admittedly probably didn't deal with some of it as well as I should have, but it's all taken a toll on me at that point. And I don't have any fight left in me anyway. So I don't want to fight about Catholicism or anything like that. I'd just like to get together and have lunch with a friend. That's all I was thinking.
Wow. So when we got together and we had that meeting, and I remember we just kind of just shared about stuff. You asked me about ministry. You asked me about what was going on, but I don't remember at that point in time feeling like we were having like a talk about Catholicism as much as it was just about life and ministry and things. And there were some things having to deal with that. But I remember feeling like you were interested enough to, I don't know, just be open to talking about a few things with that. But it wasn't an argument.
Yeah.
You know, I felt like that. And then at some point in time, I don't remember how it happened, but we got together again pretty soon after, maybe another month or so later, where I felt like that was when we really began to start talking more about Catholic things. But at what point in time did you become interested in that?
Well, I was interested in learning about your world, your world as a Catholic, right after we met that first time, because I had about a 45-minute drive home from there, and I was thinking to myself, first of all, I just enjoyed it, you know, and I was thinking to myself how dumb it is that it took us that long to get together, which I'm sure was mostly your fault. But on my way home, I'm thinking to myself, you know, we got to keep this going. This can't be a one and done. But if that's going to be the case, and it's more than just acquaintances, which it shouldn't be, because I don't think what hasn't been said here is that not only did we have that time in Newton, but you were a groomsman in my wedding.
We were bros, man.
Yes.
Like all these years, all this stuff. We have so much history together.
Yeah,
you know?
and
why do we not talk to each other that much?
Exactly. That's the thing. So I'm ruminating about that, and I'm thinking to myself, here's the deal, Aaron. Keith understands my world. Not that you were Reformed, but you understand the whole being a pastor thing. You understand that world. I don't have a clue about your world. It's bonkers to me. You know, you're doing this rosary thing. You're using a whole different language for Christianity.
We put Jesus back on the cross every, you know.
Yeah. All the stuff that I don't even want to say all the stuff right now, but not, you know, not in a hostile way. But the fact is, like, I can talk to a Lutheran and understand Lutheranism, and not just because I was Lutheran myself, because I didn't care. I wasn't paying any attention then. I can talk to a Baptist. I can talk to a Presbyterian. I could talk this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
To talk to a Catholic and really understand his world, I couldn't. There's just too much there, and too much of it just seems goofy to me at the time. I can't make sense of it. Not even sure I want to. But because you're my friend, I know that I need to. I need to at least try to understand it from your perspective, from the Catholic perspective. And that's what I got home knowing that. And then I don't remember if it was right then after that or if it happened before, where in one of your videos you're talking about how, you know, if you really want to know what the Catholic Church teaches, you need to read this. And you held up a catechism. And I had a catechism on my bookshelf that someone from my congregation had given me, along with a bunch of, I don't know if that ever happened to you. Did anybody ever just unload a bunch of books on you when you were a pastor? Because it happened to me a number of times.
Yeah, but I probably took them to Goodwill or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I kept them and I loaded up my bookshelves with them. And one of them was a Catholic catechism, but I never opened it. It was just there. I thought maybe someday it would be a useful reference for when I needed to refute some Catholic doctrine on this, that, or the other. But there it was. So I thought, okay, fine, challenge accepted. I will read the Catholic Catechism and see what in the world the Catholic Church believes in an attempt to better understand where you're coming from. That was the decision I made either on that trip home or shortly afterwards when I saw you say that in a video. I can't remember the timing of that. So I just started reading it. And so by the time we got together again, whenever that was, a month or two later, I'd already been reading the catechism for a while. And I have no idea how far I was in it at that point. I was reading, I would read it at home and making decent way through it, but I was kind of keeping track of what I agreed with and what I didn't agree with and what was kind of, I probably need to look into that a little bit more or understand this word.
This was the chart that we talked about on Pints.
This was the chart. Yeah. And I actually brought that very catechism with me right here. This is it.
Dude.
So what it is, if you look, the camera won't get this, but you can see it.
You can point it right at that camera.
I don't know if it'll show or not, but for every article that has, every article has a number, article whatever. So you can turn to this right here. I don't have my reading glasses on, but you can see that certain articles, like here's article number, looks like 492, if I'm seeing that right without my reading glasses, gave it a big old triangle, which means no way.
No way.
No way. And on I went. I'd triangle around it if it was no. I thought about putting an octagon because of a stop sign, but that was going to take me too much time.
That's a lot of,
Yeah, wouldn't work. It'd look too much like a circle. So circle it for yes, triangle for no, rectangle for, I don't know, maybe I need to understand that better. That was the process I started. And so when we got together again, by that time, I've probably started being a little bit surprised at the number of things we have in common that we could both confess together, because if you just simply go by how many circles did I have, how many triangles did I have, and so forth, the circles far outweighed the triangles, at least. I don't know about the rectangles, but a lot of that I think is attributed to the fact that I'm already creedal anyway. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've subscribed to the Apostles, the Nicene, and the Athanasian creeds. Sound familiar? Mm-hmm. It's all the same. I already subscribed to those. Now we had our Reformed confessions and catechisms as opposed to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, but having a catechism, having confessions, that's not foreign to me. That's normal Christianity to me. So to read the Catechism of the Catholic Church isn't to read something like, well, I just have the Bible, I don't need a catechism. No, my whole world is catechism and confessions. I already have those things, other doctrinal standards. So I'm just reading somebody else's doctrinal standards. That was no big deal. But by that point, I'm seeing a lot of things that are like, okay, yeah, amen, amen. And that, so it was kind of invigorating, I guess, to find out that the distance I thought existed between you as a Catholic, me as a Reformed Protestant, wasn't as wide. It wasn't it wasn't quite the chasm that I thought it was.
Well, I remember that night going over to your house for dinner, and we were sitting on your couch, and you were sitting in your chair with your stack of books, and you grabbed the catechism and you held it up, and you were like, "This is beautiful." Yeah. And I remember saying to Stella, I'm like, did you hear that? Because I figured that you would read it from an academic perspective and that you would have your things. Yeah, okay, with this, that, but no way on this, no way on that, right? But it shocked me to hear you say that it was beautiful.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, something's going on here.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to Stella about going, I think we need to pray for Aaron, because I think the Lord is drawing him to something. And the other thing that was remarkable to me about this whole thing was, because we'd get together, I don't know how many times, it was a lot.
Yeah, we started having lunch fairly regularly.
It was almost monthly, I think.
Yeah, a month or two, whatever.
I remember feeling like you were the one driving that conversation, because I was trying to be not too pushy. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I was trying to be just not get too excited, not just be like, hey, Aaron, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What about this? What about that? So I was just trying to play it cool. I mean, I was very excited to talk to you about it, but I didn't want to overwhelm you with too much of this. But I remember feeling like, no, this isn't about me at all. Like, God is working on Aaron and is showing him things that, and I saw this like energy in you around this stuff that I just remember saying, when I would get home, God is doing something. This is wild,
Yeah, and as far as what I would have been aware of at that time, what was going on is that, and back up, the "this is beautiful" statement. Mm-hmm. What really struck me about the Catechism of the Catholic Church was how pastoral it was. It was, in my world as a Reformed pastor, one of the standards that I held to and subscribed to is regarded in Reformed Christianity. And, there's a little in the weeds, but you and I, Westminster standards, the three forms, there's different, if you're Presbyterian, it's this, if you're Continental Reformed, it's this. But one of the catechisms is known for being this really beautiful pastoral, devotional catechism. And the Catholic Catechism reminded me of that. I was surprised at how it's pastoral, it's devotional. It's not just giving you facts. It's really trying to shepherd you, the reader. Like the Heidelberg Catechism in my world at that time did. This reminded me of that, and that's what I was really pleasantly surprised by, that it really was taking the reader and wanting to shepherd them along and encourage them along, not just drop facts about here's what we believe. So that was that. And as far as the other part connected with that, what you're talking about, what's going on with me, I think it has everything to do with the fact that, again, I was so tired of fighting. I was just so thrilled to find so much common ground, and again, I'm living in a world where I'm seeing the different things happen within not just the world, but within different denominations. You've talked about that in your own former denomination. That fight was going on in my denomination too. Different outcome. And that, but there's so many things that Christians could be standing together on rather than taking pot shots at each other for, about this, whatever. Not that those things don't matter, but sometimes, I think I heard this, I believe it was on Pints. It was Matt Fradd who said it, and I believe he was quoting Peter Kraft. But the phrase was, or the line was, when a maniac is at the door, feuding brothers reconcile. And I was just like, that's it. There's no reason for there to be a hostility. Not that there had been as we had been getting together, but all of that stuff, whatever was there, I don't want it there. I just want to be Christians together. And I can't see myself being a Catholic at that time, but it's okay. In fact, I remember saying that when, cause I came over, and we had lunch, and I went to a daily mass with you just to see what a mass was like. And you introduced me to Father Aaron after that. And I remember specifically saying, I don't think I could ever be Catholic, but I don't want to fight Catholics anymore. I used to want to do that. It used to be almost defining for me to do that, but I didn't want to do that anymore. So I'm kind of going through this, I don't know if it's a transformation, but I'm going through this process where I'm thrilled to learn that I don't have to be anti-Catholic.
Yeah.
I can just be peaceful, and we can just be Christians together. That was thrilling for me.
But you probably thought that was where it was going to stop, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But it was good enough for me too.
Sure.
It was fine. I was fine with it stopping there. It was just, that was enough, because what was there when you first told me, hey, I'm thinking about becoming Catholic, and my reaction to that, my kind of visceral reaction to that, in the wake of all the fighting I'd had to do, and all that going on, 2020, 2021, those things we just talked about, it was wonderful to be able to talk to a Catholic friend, not feeling like I had to change you, not feeling like it was on me to make sure that you got your garbage corrected here, because, because that's where I was before. And it was a relief. It was a relief to not have to do that. And it was also a delight to see that I didn't have to do that we could just talk. And I just enjoyed learning about that world. I call it was an academic study. It really was. Yeah. I kind of gave myself probably not a seminary course, but a university course probably in Catholicism.
Now, I remember a moment in your journey when that began to shift. But I wonder if you're thinking, you probably have many more moments than the one I'm thinking of. But I want you to talk a little bit about when that started to change for you from the standpoint of, okay, I can not fight with Catholics anymore, to then what are the stages, what are some of the mile markers, the things that happen along the way to get you to a point where you started thinking, maybe I could, or maybe I should become Catholic?
Yeah, I think that point, and I'll be interested to hear what you will say about that.
All right.
But you can keep that in the pocket for now, and we'll see. But I think what I thought about this on the way here today, and I think what was going on is that God kind of Trojan horsed me. I think that's what happened. But because there's so much of it that I wasn't aware of what was going on, or at least I'm only aware of it in retrospect. But another thing that I haven't said, that I know you know this, but another thing I haven't said is that through all of that, all the things I just talked about that really drained my energy, another thing that happened in there, and this was as early as spring of 2021, I just prayed at one point. I said, Lord, I don't think I've ever not wanted to be a pastor since this all started. And by this all, I mean since I became a pastor. It was all I ever wanted to do. But I told him, based on how I was feeling, if you don't want me to be a pastor anymore, I'm ready to walk away. If you show me how to do that without causing a bunch of damage, and all that. So in my mind and in my heart, I was already ready to not be a pastor if and when the Lord kind of showed me that. I describe it as driving down the interstate at night in the fog. You can see about 50 to 100 feet ahead of you, and you're looking for the exit ramp. You don't know where it is, and when it comes, it won't be because you put it there. It's just going to be there. And that's kind of how I was thinking about things. And there were ups and downs to that. Things got a little bit better for a time after, maybe in 2022 or so, I would say they did. But the backdrop to everything going on is that when God gives me the indication, I'm ready to not be a pastor anymore because I'm spent. So with that being said, there comes a point where I'm actively thinking, because I'm a bit of a scenario runner, it's hard to shut my mind off. I'm actively thinking about, well, what is next? What will I do? Employment-wise, what will I do church-wise? I remember talking to a pastor who is a good friend of mine. He was kind of my mentor in many ways, same denomination. And it was sometime after COVID, and he asked me what I learned through COVID. And I said a couple of things, but one of the things that I said was, I learned that when I'm no longer a pastor, I need to be a good parishioner. I need to be a good support to the pastor. And that's what I said, because I was I wasn't thinking of a priest, of course, but so in my mind, in some ways, I'm checking out, at least in the scenarios that I'm running. I'm thinking down the line of what next. The problem is I know that Cami isn't interested in what's next, but still I will think about these things to myself. And what happened over time was that, at least in my mind, the Catholic Church became a viable option, of where could we end up? And, but of course, a lot of things would have to happen for that to be the case. But no matter what, I know that it's not going to be in a church of my own denomination, because I can't go somewhere where I'm going to constantly be asked to preach. Mm-hmm. I don't want to do that anymore. When the time comes when I'm not a pastor, I'm done. I didn't want to do it anymore. And so I didn't even want that possibility. I'm already thinking through what type of situation would it be? Yeah. What types of denominations would I consider? It's got to have some sort of a formal liturgy, that's just where I'm at, these types of things. But what I think was really surprising to me as I read through the catechism, and then as I reread it, and I kind of cycled through it some, and I don't know if that's what you were going to start to get at, but I found that as I would go back through it, some of the things that I'd marked as flat out disagreements or kind of middle of the road, not sure, they kind of upgraded some of them, to the point where because I'm studying, I'm learning more, and I'm, there's a lot in the Catechism. There's a lot. I don't know if you know this, but there's a lot going on in the Catholic Church.
Kidding.
Yeah, no, you got to look into it sometime. And so I'm digesting it. I'm processing it. I'm trying to make sense of it, and I'm starting to make a little more sense of it. So certain things are, certain dots are being connected that weren't connected before. And my list of flat out disagreements is shrinking, and so I don't know. I think you and I have talked about this. I should have looked at the date, but I think I have the date, but there comes a point where I know that if and when God shows me the off-ramp, the Catholic Church is at or at least near the top of the list, as far as I'm concerned. But there's another person that was concerned in that too, and of course that's Cami. And at that point, she's not really enjoying all the reading about Catholicism that I'm doing because she's fearing the worst.
Yep. I remember Cami sitting on my couch in tears, just going, what is going on?
Yeah.
And, just all this profanity and everything. No, I'm just kidding. Cami doesn't even say like poop. Like, anyway, but she was like in her own way expressing her terror and what was going on. And I remember feeling so bad for her because you and I had been meeting, and that was one of the recurring themes was, what about, I'm learning about this stuff. I'm growing in this. And I want to get to some of those specifics here in a minute, but that was a huge concern for you. That was like the biggest hurdle for you was you didn't want to do anything without your wife. You didn't want a scenario like we've all seen where, one person becomes Catholic, the other person is against it, and then they have to try to figure out how to live in this environment. You were determined to not make that happen. And I remember saying to you, well, if God is at work in you, he's going to be at work in her. Don't worry about that right now. I remember saying that to you several times. Don't worry about that right now. You need to figure out where you're at with what you're thinking. But I do want to come back to what helped with Cami. But what I was remembering in the middle of all this, like you have this academic study thing going on. Mm-hmm. You're making your chart. But I don't know how this happened. Somewhere along the way, I gave you a miraculous medal. And I remember you called me one day or texted me, and you were like, something happened with this.
Oh, yeah.
You went for a walk, and you had this medal in your pocket. Something happened with that miraculous medal that just like somehow you felt like there's something going on here. Do you remember that?
I do. So, yeah. You gave that to me early on. Like, you gave this thing to me. I get this. So to back up to Aaron of that time, you're giving me a couple of books. You're giving me stuff. I'd stop.
That's what Catholics have to do.
Yeah, I guess.
They're required.
I guess.
Like, you must give medals and books to people.
Yeah, and so that's what you were doing. So well done. But you give me, there's this card, and it's got artwork on it, and it's clearly the Virgin Mary. That much I know. And there's a little oval medal just scotch taped to the card. And I'm like, what is this? And you say, well, that's a miraculous medal. And I'm just thinking, yeah, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work at all. Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. And I was like, well, what is it? What do you do with it? What's it for? And I don't even remember exactly what you said. As I recall, you were just kind of sheepishly handing it to me, and I think you really wanted me to take it or something, but it was like you were slipping into the stack of stuff to take.
It's a bookmark.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the card ended up being a bookmark, but I can tell you that ended up in the between the seats console of my car for a long time. I didn't know what to. I said, well, what am I supposed to do with this? Can it just be in my car? Yeah, you can do whatever you want with it. I think you just wanted me to get out of your house with it, but and so I did, and through some of the reading I've done, I've definitely softened on a lot of what I've heard you call the Mary stuff, and, I've been shocked to discover that the guys that I consider my forefathers in the faith, the reformers, all continue to hold to her perpetual virginity, and so I'm just like, it's funny. I don't know if you went through this or not, but I kind of went through this period where I'm a little bit irritated that some of this stuff should have remained a part of what Protestantism was. I mean, if you can talk about that, it should have been, but you know what I mean? It's like, why this didn't have to be jettisoned. Why isn't this still there? Because I'm thinking, how could these guys, how could Luther, how could Calvin, how could Zwingli and others, how could they believe that she remained a virgin?
They're sola scriptura.
Yeah, exactly. So then I read about what they were writing, and it's like, wait a second here. This actually makes sense. So where did this get lost? Because I feel like something that should have been part of my faith tradition and in a sense part of my birthright as a Christian had been kicked to the curb unnecessarily. So I kind of went through these things along the way where I just kind of get irritated about some of this stuff. So I'm going through this kind of a transformation. It's not me desiring to be Catholic at that point. It's me loving the fact of this commonality and wishing more of it were there. That's really what it is. And not just for you and me, but for the church. Because again, I'm seeing that, look, we're going to have to stand together because things are going nuts. So at any rate, back to the metal. I decide to pull that out of my console at one point. And what I know I need more than anything else from my own perspective at that time is for Cami to have the same vision of the end of my time as a pastor that I have. I want us on the same page. And at that point, that's what I want us on the same page on. That's the thing that matters most to me because I'm just spent. And so by this time there's so many things I keep wanting to go back. Oh, here's this story. Oh, here's that story. It's too much. But through a sermon series I did in the summer where I would take questions from the congregation to do maybe 6-8 weeks of just kind of answering theological questions or whatever that they had. One of the things was on the church and what is the church? And sometimes I feel like I'm just here occupying space kind of a thing. And I thought, well, you know what? Hebrews 12 would be a great place to go for this. And I'm talking about the Mount Sinai versus Mount Zion dynamic there. You've come to the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the Father, to the Son, to myriads of angels, to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. And this, it's like you're reading the fellowship of the saints there, but it's like you've come into their presence. And so I'm becoming aware that there's a depth to this thing that I've confessed all my life called the communion of the saints. There's a depth to it, and there are layers to it that I hadn't realized. And so I'm like, okay, Mary, I need Cami to see what I'm seeing about what the future, about me not being a pastor anymore. That's what I really want right there. And by that point, I know that the saints in heaven and we on earth are in communion with one another in the mystical body of Christ. So I decide to ask her for her help. And I'm holding that miraculous medal, but I'm out on this walk that I'm on, and I'm holding my phone. I'm holding I've got, I guess the keys are in my pocket. I've got these different things in my hand, and I'm worried I'm going to lose this thing. I was like, I need a chain for this or something. I don't have a chain. I need a chain for this that I can just slip through this. Why didn't Keith give me a chain? He just gave me a card and a piece of tape. So it's like right after that, I'm on the treadmill at home, and I look down on the table, and there's this silver chain on the table in front of me that had been there, but I'd never noticed it before.
I snuck in there and put it there.
Yeah, no, I actually know where it came from, but it was just so funny that it just, and I'm not trying to be all, woo, But it's just these things, things just start happening, I guess is what it is. And I'm like, that's my chain. And so I started carrying that, and it, I had it around my fingers so that I couldn't lose the medal. In fact, I didn't know you were going to ask this, but that's the medal you gave me right there. That's the one, and that's the chain.
Wow.
So I still have it.
That chain fits around your neck?
No, around my hand.
Okay.
So, but I'm...
So it's a bracelet?
No.
That's what a chain around your
hand. I said hand, not wrist. Right. No, what it is I'm seeing the, looking through different passages and coming to these conclusions like marriage being a sacrament. Mm-hmm. That's making sense to me, because, you want to have some sort of what's a sacrament? It's got to be something really important. It's like, well, Ephesians 5 and, just the importance of marriage and thinking about it sacramentally. I've never thought about that before, but it's making sense to me. So I'm just like, okay, well, there's no way Cami's ever going to, do anything with this other than throw it away if I were to give it to her at that point. So instead, I would put it on my ring and hold it there while I'm walking, because this is the sign of our wedding together. Mm-hmm. And so that was just my way of, by faith, trying to say, this is beyond me. I need help.
Yeah.
Because I need to find that exit ramp. It's only getting worse for me, the experience, but I need her to be on the same page with me, and I can't make that happen. So that's how that all started. This medal came out of the console, eventually had the chain attached to it. And I just started asking for help. That was basically it. I asked for help, and then I'd walk and I'd listen to whatever I was listening to. And that was that. But, and again, I don't remember exactly. It had to be nice weather. So, late spring or summer that year, something like that. So, but I think things started to happen, then as I was asking for help. But we were still kind of at an impasse, Cami and me, with respect to me resigning. She could not see that still. I wanted it. She didn't want it. But yeah, I would say that's the point at which it's switching from being academic to being lived out in some way, in my life. The things that I've been reading, the things I've been studying, some of the things I've become convinced of, it started to move from being, oh, this is nice, we don't have to fight about these things, mm-hmm. to being, yeah, I don't know, this, I think this makes sense to me, and it can be a part of my spirituality too, my devotion. I can incorporate this into my life. And I was also finding a lot of joy in doing that.
What's an example of something that at first you marked in your book as what, a triangle, like no way, mm-hmm. that later you had to change, and how did that happen?
Well, I mean, I'll say something different than this, but everything I just said would have been a triangle, to start. Anything having to do...
Communion of Saints, but were there other things like that were like, all right, I can buy that, Hebrews 12, even Hebrews 11, whatever. It's like, okay, but come on, there's no way you're going to find purgatory in the Bible or something like that.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. Purgatory is the last one, really. I mean, there are other things. So take, for instance, the canon.
Yeah.
There's and I'm not unfriendly to the Deuterocanonicals. It's just that I call them the Apocrypha, but they're listed in one of my Reformed confessions as being valuable to read. You're just not supposed to derive doctrine from them, Right. So it's like, okay, I'm fine with that, but not as scripture. That would be a thing. Mm-hmm. 7 sacraments as opposed to 2. That would have been an initial, anything having to do with any sacrament that wasn't baptism or communion would have been a triangle. And certainly parts of baptism and communion would have been a triangle. The presence of Christ in the Eucharist, triangles all over the place, and, the role of baptism, triangles all over the place. But yeah, and down to things like purgatory as well, for sure. But to talk about that one, what changed my mind on that? St. Francis de Sales changed my mind on that. Reading his, it's not really his book, but, compilation of
his writings,
tracts, whatever that he wrote, the leaflets that he would distribute. He was talking about, and it's organized, kind of doctrinally and different things. And there's a chapter on sacraments in this, and reading on purgatory. He connected dots for me that I just had never connected, and it made sense. And it didn't just make sense of purgatory. It made sense of a verse in the Bible that I would say is one of the top 3 most confusing verses in the Bible if you're a Protestant, I would say. He was talking about, and I don't know exactly which verse, it's a couple of verses in 1 Corinthians 15, which is the resurrection chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Paul's defending Christ's resurrection, and then talking about how our resurrection is certain. The believer's resurrection is certain in light of Christ's resurrection. Of course, of course, the dead are raised. He's having that discussion, but in that discussion, he throws this really weird statement out there, and he says, "Otherwise, why are they baptized for the dead?" And so, the Mormons have a way of dealing with that, and they actually practice baptism for the dead. But St. Francis de Sales says, well, look, the church has always viewed this as Jesus using the term baptism the same, or as Paul using baptism here the same way Jesus did when he says, "Can you be baptized with the baptism that I'm going to be baptized with?" Or I have a baptism to undergo. He's talking about suffering. He's talking about, it's a metaphor. And St. Francis de Sales says, this is what's going on here. Paul's saying, otherwise, why is there, you could say suffering or mortification or whatever. Why is that for the dead if the dead are not raised? Why do people do this if they're not raised? Of course they're raised, because look what we do for the dead.
So it's a misunderstanding of the word baptism that causes the confusion. But when you look at what it meant in light of how Jesus also used it, that makes perfect sense with regard to purgatory.
Yes. And that was the thing where it was like, because everything for me was going to require, I hate to say it, but it's true. Where's that in the Bible? It's, you know what I mean?
But you know what though? That's a good point, because, and we're going to talk about this, as Catholics, we get hit with that a lot. But the reality is, especially for guys like you, that's where you found Catholicism.
Yeah. Yeah. If it couldn't be shown to me in some way. Now, I don't need it spelled out directly in a certain kind of sentence or anything like that, because I was versed enough in typology already to recognize that this is part of the language of the scriptures. It's part of how you come to understand what it's saying. So I'm good with that. But I couldn't see it. I couldn't see purgatory anywhere in the Bible. And it's like, there's just no way. It's not there. So I would say that was kind of the passage, understanding that kind of opened the floodgates with respect to that particular doctrine to see other places where it's there, because that's not the only place it is. But that's the one where I really first saw it, and where I really my objections either softened or went away completely, because I was just like, because it was like a 2 birds with 1 stone thing. Mm-hmm. It was not only, here's purgatory, but it was also, here's how to make sense of this verse you never wanted to have to preach on, that kind of a thing. So it was really an impressive move. I discovered later that it seems that what St. Paul is doing there is really taking a page out of 2 Maccabees, because the same basic argument is made there when they discover the idols under and they're talking about how they made sacrifices, they gave an offering for them, and the author goes on to say of how this was a noble thing to do, and of course they were looking ahead to the resurrection, otherwise why would they have done this kind of a thing? And Paul knows that book because it's in the Septuagint, And I think he's making the same basic argument there in 1 Corinthians 15. So that cemented it even more. But
well, okay, so you brought up the canon. I know that was a big thing for you as well. Yeah. You went from being, because a lot of people think, oh, well, Martin Luther threw these books out of the Bible. We hate these books. But that's not really how Reformed people are supposed to view those books. They view them as profitable, but not for doctrine.
Right.
So you had familiarity with them. But what was it that made you take seriously the Catholic Church's claim that these books were scripture?
It was your interview with Gary Machuda. I think that's where it started anyway. Yeah. I don't think at that time that happened for me, but I've described that this way. I had a lot of dominoes that needed to fall, and most of them fell really, really slowly, but I think that might have been the first one that toppled, because if I'm not going to be convinced at the scriptural level, including what is scripture, I'm not going to be convinced at all. It's just not going to happen. So that was huge, but just learning the history of those books and what actually happened with them, and how yes, there were differences of opinion going back as far, Jerome is a popular one thrown out there, St. Jerome, but there are others along the way, and there was kind of a back and forth. But I think what really shocked me, I think it was seismic. I didn't understand it at the time, but I think it was seismic for me, was to see that in, the Council of Hippo, Council of Rome, these are late 4th century, Augustine's own writings, you see a 73 book canon listed. That was absolutely staggering to me.
And you didn't know that before?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't know about those lists. I didn't know that it was affirmed in the 1400s at the Council of Florence, before Trent, 100 years or so before Trent. I didn't know that. I didn't know that, I knew that Luther had left them sandwiched between the old and the new. Something else I learned that was completely surprising to me is that the Synod of Dort, which most of your viewers aren't going to know what that means, that was super important for my denomination.
That's a reformed.
It's a reformed synod,
council-ish,
yes,
kind of a thing.
Yeah,
yeah.
And with some debate, they also retained again, in the Reformed world, you're calling it the Apocrypha. In the Protestant world, you know that. So Apocrypha / Deuterocanon, it's still at the back as an appendix, which had kind of become the standard operating procedure, from after Luther anyway. Then that started happening. But that what ultimately happened was that they've kind of fully and finally got removed from Protestant Bibles by Bible societies. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. That's actually what happened.
Yeah. And one of the excuses was it was cheaper.
Yes, because the Bibles, they could print the Bibles for cheaper and still sell them for the same price. So it's like, okay, so this kind of a decision is being made by Bible societies. But it's all laid out there. So that interview, Gary talks about that, and I ended up reading his book, Why Catholic Bibles Are Bigger. It was quite a while.
Yeah, I think I gave you that book, didn't I?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was quite a while down the line when I read it, but
shout out to Gary.
Yeah, for sure.
Love that guy.
Yeah, and I don't want to go into that. I'm a tangent guy. I'm having a hard time not going on every tangent that comes to my mind, but at any rate, that was seismic. It was earth-shattering, even if I didn't realize it at the time. Because you can go way back before the Reformation and find these books regarded as scripture, the councils when they speak, and you can talk about, but what about St. Jerome? What about what he said? He didn't want to include them. Yeah, but he did.
Yeah.
He did though.
Which that's also a proof of the authority of the papacy, that even when this guy who was this biblical heavyweight, even him, he didn't say, well, this is what I've decided, forget you guys. He still said, this is what I think, but I'm going to go with what the Pope says.
Right.
And of course, that leads to that issue of authority of the papacy. And I know you're a big typology guy. I know how that connects for you. What was it that made that domino fall?
Isaiah 22, where God, through Isaiah, is announcing that the steward Shebna, who was a wicked steward, is going to be replaced by a good steward. And it talks about how the new steward is going to be given the keys to the house of David. And there's all this language that's used there, the authority, what he shuts, no one will be able to open. What he opens, no one will be able to shut. Keys to the kingdom. And then fast forward to Matthew 16, where you have this famous discourse there. Who do people say I am? Who do you say I am? And Peter makes his confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then, of course, you have Jesus' statement that calls Peter the rock, and he says, I will give you the keys of the kingdom. And, and he uses the same type of language for Peter that is used for
Eliakim.
That's right. The name was escaping me. And it's so clear. It's so clear that that's what Jesus is doing. I don't know. I think you have to try not to see that, to not see it. You really have to try, because it's so clear that Jesus is establishing that same office in his kingdom. And his is the fulfillment of the Davidic kingdom. And so he's saying the Davidic kingdom had this office of steward. My kingdom has this office of steward. We call that office the Pope now, the papacy. Mm-hmm. But it's essentially the office of the steward that Jesus was establishing. So once I see that, and it's like, well, then what else can I do at that point? Because the other facet of this is woven through all of this over time, but very much a part of it is the fact that, okay, well, that sounds great, but is that interpretation, 60 years old? How long has that thought been around about that? And so now you bump up against the other thing that I was bumping up against almost as a constant through all of this statement that to be deep in history is to cease to be Protestant.
Newman,
yeah, Newman. And I just more and more, kind of against my will, found that to be true. I can't even begin to count the number of times I was surprised to learn that, oh, this is a thing that the church, and you can go back that far and find that the church taught this, that the church believed this, that if you were Christian, you just believed this. That was another part of that was another staggering part of the process, part of a lot of the dominoes falling down, because it's not like one person with a clever interpretation of the Bible is going to be persuasive to me, but an interpretation of the scriptures, an understanding of what's being said, that is that 2,000 years old, or even if you can't trace it 2,000 years back, you can get awfully close on these things. And yeah, that was very, to say it was persuasive is an understatement, but again, these are things I was resistant to at first, but over time it just became undeniable. It became something that was just like, and these are the types of things that get me to the point where in my own thinking, the Catholic Church is a viable option. And at some point it's not just a viable option, it's my preferred option, but I still have the situation with Cami.
Yeah. Yeah. And through the middle of this, the other thing I saw happening was you met Father Aaron when you came up for a daily mass, but the two of you continued to correspond, and you guys were doing like Zoom calls and talking to each other. And I remember thinking, why is he talking to Father Aaron so much? But God was drawing you, man. God was putting people in your path and things in your path, and those dominoes were beginning to fall. But as you mentioned, right, the life stuff is there.
Yeah.
And the marriage stuff is there. And I remember feeling like, okay, we just have to trust that God is going to be at work in Cami's heart as well. And maybe, Lord willing, someday Cami will be sitting here and she'd be willing to tell her story too. I know she's not a person that likes to be out in front of people doing that, but I think people would want to hear from her. But tell me what that was like for her, like when you started to get a sense that maybe some of these things you're asking for the Blessed Mother's help with, that was starting to come around.
Up to that time in our marriage, we kind of had a joke that whenever she heard me say, Cami, there's something we need to talk about, it was an uh-oh moment, because I had come across something in theology that meant something we had thought about was maybe we were going to be going a different direction on that. That was kind of a joke, but it was a joke because it had happened enough times to make it a joke. I think this was her fear. This was her fear that this was happening again.
Yeah.
And how many stories are there of the guy, or maybe it's the woman. The ones I've heard, it's the man reading and the wife saying, hey, what's going on here? And you're like, hey, I'm not going to be Catholic. You kidding me?
Oh, hi, that's my story.
That would never happen. I know. Okay. But, and it's what I thought too. I didn't think that I would or could. How could I? But, time goes on, and now it goes from, she sees me study things. It's what I do. If I get interested in something, the Amazon boxes start showing up loaded with books, and I just read about stuff. And so this is initially nothing more than that from her perspective. From my perspective, it's nothing more than that. But over time, she starts to get nervous. And over a little more time, she starts to get really nervous. And so now nervous becomes kind of arguments.
Terror.
Well, terror, yes, but I can't talk about cool things that I've learned anymore because she's concerned that it's going a step too far, maybe multiple steps too far. And, it's just part of this dynamic that's going on where, because I feel incredibly drawn away from being a pastor, and I'm starting to feel drawn to the Catholic Church as I look down the road at when I'm not a pastor anymore. Mm-hmm. And at some point in my mind, those things begin maybe to sync up, but I just don't know if they can, because I don't know how in the world. She's not on board with either one of them. I just need her on board with the one for now, to not be a pastor anymore. And so there are some different things, try different conversations. It doesn't work. But there came a point, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the point where we actually really start having the question about whether or not it's time for me to resign. Is that where you're going? I'll just say that there was a situation that I became aware of that was it was something I was going to have to deal with. And it was something that I was not looking forward to. It was something that I wasn't even sure I could deal with as a pastor. And we were just about ready to go on vacation. And I told her about this when I became aware of it, about what was going on. And when we got back from vacation, this was going to be the deal. And she said, what does that do for you? And I said, nothing good. Nothing good. And she said, maybe this is your exit ramp. And in my mind, I was over the moon and just about passed out at the same time, because I'd never heard her say that before. I'd never heard her acknowledge as a viable possibility me resigning from being a pastor. And I still didn't know how. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know if this was the right timing or not, because I didn't want to, men in general, I think, can be impulsive. And I didn't want to make a rash decision, but now for a few years, I haven't wanted to make a rash decision. I'm probably past the point of making a rash decision, but still, I just hadn't felt great about any of the scenarios I'd run. But the second she said, maybe this is your exit ramp, I was like, okay, Maybe we're on the same page now. Maybe this convergence was a big word for me at the time. Maybe things are starting to converge now. And I'll tell you one thing that happened, I think, that aside from prayers, aside from intercession of the saints, aside from, all of that, I think something that really had to happen in there was that she had no space at all in her heart, in her mind, in her energy for having these conversations while she was still tending to her dying mom. And her mom had passed away just a couple of months before this. And so this is late summer last year, 2024, when this happens. And I think the Lord just gave her space to think about that now and to consider things that she hadn't been considering. And there's some other stuff that was going on that at that point I wasn't even aware of. But so we determined, okay, we're going on vacation. While we're down there, going to Florida, while we're down there, we're going to take some time to talk, to pray, to kind of deliberately address this and decide together, is this the time? Is God showing us the off-ramp right now? And so we went down there. We enjoyed our time on the beach. We did our things, but we also spent some time reading and praying and just kind of connecting about this. And we came home in 100% lockstep that I needed to announce my resignation. And that's what I did. We got home on a Tuesday. I went to a meeting that Tuesday night and told my elders that I needed to resign, that I was going to step down from being the pastor.
Well, there's some daylight, though, between issue number 1 and issue number 2.
Yeah.
Because getting Cami to understand that it was time for you to resign is one thing, but getting her, who was terrified of what was happening with all this Catholicism stuff, to actually consider it for herself. Because for you, that was kind of like, it was almost, and you could say it's hypothetical, but like, in your mind, that was sort of like a package deal. For you to become Catholic, you didn't want to do that without her.
Yeah, I didn't see, I honestly didn't see that as a possibility. I know that you could say, and I know that's not everybody's experience too, and I know you could say, well, yeah, but if God calls you, then you gotta, okay, that's fine. That's all well and good. In my case, though, I did not feel that. I felt like if we're going to do this, it's going to be together. And I can't, and I would say I knew that. How? Well, I don't know. I just did.
Sure.
I just knew that was the thing. It was still an if for me, but I knew that if that was going to happen, that it was going to be the two of us being in lockstep, not only on my resignation, but at some point on where we're going to, what church we're going to be a part of when, because once you decide the resignation, boom, it's done.
Next thing.
Now you're going to have to start having the conversation about what's next. And so to me, there had to be lockstep on both of those things.
So how did that happen for her?
You'll have to interview her.
I would love to.
Okay, so I'll tell the
we just can't leave that. We can't leave that sleeve hanging out of that suitcase, man. We have to tie that up a little bit.
Good callback.
Okay.
Good callback. Okay, so from my this is how I experienced it. We're walking along the beach on this particular vacation, and we're having the conversation about resigning. And we get to the point, it didn't take us the whole week. We get to the point where we've decided, yes, when we get back, I'm going to announce my resignation. It's probably near the end of our week down there, or however many 8 days it was. And we're walking along the beach. I remember we're just about to get drenched by a storm coming in. And we're talking about the future. We're talking about our kids. We're talking about different things and about, what's next? Are we going to talk to our children? I'm going through some changes just in terms of, devotional type changes, certain areas of my life, recognizing that I really need to improve my prayer life, for instance. I'm kind of going through my own things with that, and there's a lot that I want to talk to my kids about. There's a lot I probably can't talk to my kids about at this point. A lot that will have to trickle in, slowly. But just some basic stuff that we'd talked about, not Catholic stuff, certainly at that point, not even necessarily resignation stuff, just about that desire you have for your kids to take their faith seriously all the days of their lives, to really, because our kids are growing up, they're moving out, and we're starting to feel that, man, did we make the most of the time when we had them all in our house? And like most parents, we're concluding we could have done things better, And so we're having that conversation, and she's asking me about talking to the kids. I say, yeah, I want to talk to them. We'll get together with them. I don't know how it'll work, one at a time, whatever. Because there's stuff we want to be able to share with them about different things we've concluded, maybe even some things we'd like to apologize for. And I said, yeah, I'll talk to them. We'll have those conversations, and we'll try to do what we can to, to discuss those things, to address those things that you and I are considering important. And she said, well, I don't just mean that. I mean, talking to them about if you think the Catholic Church is where we need to be. And I remember just stopping and looking at her and say, why would you say that? I've never heard you say that at all. But that was my awareness that there was something going on with her other than just being annoyed with me about reading Catholic.
That's a big
stuff.
thing.
Yeah. It's hard to not be annoyed with me. So that of course became a much bigger conversation that had to, in some ways, take a back seat for a time because we had the emotions of the resignation. When I announced it to the leaders, that was early in September. Mm-hmm. We didn't announce it to the congregation until early in October. So as you and I are here right now, just a year and a couple of weeks ago is when I announced, when the congregation became aware that I was going to resign as pastor. And it wasn't until after that we really started having the serious conversations about the what's next conversation.
Yeah. So I remember that was a struggle for you because you didn't want to scandalize your church. You didn't want to stand up in front of your congregation and say, I'm going to become Catholic. See you later. I mean, you were even wrestling with that after you left the church because you were trying not to hurt the people there to the point where you were driving over here every weekend to go to Mass, to come to the Catholic Church before you were a part of it. And I think this kind of is going to bring us to that post that you made.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, we have to get to when you actually came into the church, which was the Easter Vigil.
Yeah.
And I had one of the most powerful experiences of my life at that night because you guys came in here and, the Easter Vigil is obviously a pretty long drawn out thing. And I was also sponsoring someone else from my old church. So I was sitting with Estelle next to my other friend, and then you were on the other side of the aisle with Cami and two of your kids who came in with you.
Yep.
And when it was time for us to go up to receive communion after we had done all the stuff, you and I just happened to, at the exact same time, find ourselves on our knees on the communion, the kneeling rail right next to each other.
Yeah.
So your first time receiving the Eucharist, I was right there, literally next to you.
Same
that
time.
was one of the most amazing things in my life.
And we didn't start at the same spot either. The lines just moved at a pace.
It was like you were way up there, I was back here, and then it just kind of, boom.
Yeah.
There we were, and man, I've just seen God do such an amazing thing. That whole process with you and with Cami has been one of the most amazing things for Estelle and I to be a part of. It was so cool. But when did you decide it was time to come out of the closet to your people?
Well, that decision was made for me, really, is how that went. We had friends who started asking us after the new year, where have you decided to go to church?
And these are friends that are parishioners.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. These are friends who, for the most part, have been our friends longer than they were like my parishioners, that type of thing. But so naturally they're going to ask. We're friends. At some point, we went out to dinner or something like that. And it was just like one couple at a time. They asked, and they, and I'm not sure how badly they wanted to ask. They wanted to ask, but they didn't want to.
They were like afraid to get the answer.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. It was just awkward. It was awkward for all of us, because none of us, we never envisioned resigning. That wasn't part of the plan. I would die there. I would retire from there, or maybe the church would decide I needed to move on or something like that. Resigning wasn't in the cards. So everybody's just kind of dealing with this weirdness of this situation that no one thought was ever going to happen, us included. But they asked us, so where have you decided to go to church? And we had already decided that after the new year, in the new year, we decided we think we feel free to talk about this when I'm not a pastor. Now that I'm not a pastor, because it was, late in 2024, we're deciding that we think this is what we're going to do. 2025 comes around and that's what we start doing and coming to the Catholic Church. And so they asked and we told them. And, the conversation went as you might expect, without any hostility. They're better people than I was.
You're going where?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're, and so the questions start coming, the what about this, what about that? It was perfectly reasonable questions. And, we answered as best we could at that night. It was actually very late on two of these conversations when we started to talk about them. So it could only go so far. But there would be follow-ups. What about this? What about that? And so we got pushback, but it was fairly friendly, I will say, to their credit. And so we just gave our answers and explained as best we could. Some of the stuff we just talked about, the Pope, the steward, this type of stuff. We talked about those things. And over time, they were kind of looking into some things themselves. There were other things that were going on in their lives, just situationally, family and otherwise, that just things that we didn't know about, things where they had been thinking different things or experiencing different things. And it's just, I say, my point in saying that is that the Holy Spirit was already at work in their lives in certain ways, preparing them for these conversations in ways that we didn't even know about. But gradually, these conversations became more conversations, and this happened with multiple families. And over time, it was, I guess, in April, somewhere early April maybe, where it's like one by one. In each family situation, there would be one spouse who is maybe a little more convinced, one who's resisting. And, whatever dynamics are going on behind the scenes, I'm not privy to that. But at some point, it's like all of a sudden everybody just decided we're going to be Catholic. And it happened seemingly within a week or so, I think, where decisions were made. Like the one spouse who was willing to consider it, the other one was like, no way, or that's too much of a shakeup. But things just happened, and one thing led to another, or one thing happened right after another. And the next thing I know, they've all decided that's what they want to do. And since they're at my old church, it's, connections are made.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm not the most popular person in the world.
I can imagine.
So everything I tried to avoid, everything we tried to prevent from happening, because we love the people of our old church, it all happened. it all happened anyway. What's the lesson from that? I don't know. But
the lesson is you should listen to me, because I was telling you before, I'm like, just tell them what you're doing. Quit trying to, don't worry about this. It's going to be fine. And you're like, I can't do that. And now look what happened. If you'd listened to me, maybe this wouldn't have happened. So it's probably better you did it your way than it was God's way.
Yeah, I can't imagine anything good.
I'll tell you one quick story real quick.
Okay.
So I'm at my church, and one of the relatives of one of these people you're talking about, who I don't even know these people. I don't even know these people.
Yep.
This guy's in town visiting, comes up to me at Mass. He recognizes me from something, and he says, hey, please pray for my brother. He's at such and such church, and his pastor, like, my brother is feeling kind of drawn to the Catholic Church, but he's afraid to talk to his pastor, who's like pretty anti-Catholic. He's a Reformed pastor, and he's afraid to say anything to him about it, but my brother's feeling kind of drawn to the church. And I'm like, okay, well, who's your brother and what's the church? And of course, it was you. And not the brother, you're the pastor.
Yeah.
So this guy says to me, oh, he's so-and-so, and he's going to, and his pastor's name's Gunsaulus. And I'm sitting there, and I can't say anything, because you're like, don't tell anybody. And so I'm just like, oh, yeah, well, yeah, that's interesting. I think you should just trust the Lord on this, Well, that guy's now a Catholic, and so are you.
Yeah.
But you used that word convergence before. We talked about that. And you've also talked about how there are those mysterious things that take place. And you also mentioned that God was at work in their lives behind the scenes. And that's what he was doing in your life. He was behind the scenes in your life. And this is one of the messages that I want to get across to our people that are listening. When we talk to people in our lives about the church and about Jesus in general, sometimes we put all this pressure on ourselves that we've got to come up with the right things to say. I mean, I showed up to our first meeting with all the books, all the whatever, and we think that it all hinges on our ability to say the right thing, or to have the right argument, or whatever it might be, or even be the right kind of person. And really the truth is, the only kind of person we need to be is obedient and open. And the only things we need to say are the things that God puts on us to say. And even if we get it wrong, his Spirit is still at work in and through us around that. Because what we each have to remember is that God has placed us in those situations. He didn't place somebody else. He placed us. And what we have to do is have confidence in that, from the standpoint of saying, okay, God, you're the one that put me in front of Aaron at that restaurant. Whatever he wants to do is going to be okay. Because we can have this tendency to think, oh man, if I say the wrong thing, it's all going to fall apart. And that's what I was trying to tell you about Cami. Just don't worry about that. Let God work. But that's a hard thing, because we're so conditioned to believe that even though we can say, it's all God, we're conditioned to believe that, well, it's up to us. And what I find super ironic is that the Catholic guy and the Reformed guy, you become Catholic according to the sovereignty of God. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that's not lost on me, that so much of what drew you to Reformed theology has come full circle, and you really didn't have to jettison those aspects of Reformed theology that were so important to you. The sovereignty of God, the providence of God, the depravity from the standpoint of saying, look, I can't do this. I can't earn it. Catholicism doesn't teach that we earn our salvation. You know that.
Yeah.
But it's almost like where you were with all of that Reformed stuff that was so important to you, you didn't really jettison it. You came into the fullness of it. There were some things, of course, that had to be, modified. But I think that's the lesson here, is that we're not as far apart as we think we are. But what we have to do is truly surrender ourselves over to the Lord and have that fuller vision of who he is. And the fuller vision is that he started a church, not that he just gave us a book, which, you could argue, well, did he or didn't he, from a certain perspective. Mm-hmm. But there's no doubt that he gave us a church and he gave us a mother. He gave us his mother. There's so many things we could talk about. We could talk about your sermon that you preached. I preached a sermon about Mary before I was a Catholic in my Protestant church. You did the same thing. You preached a sermon. I told Stella, I said, that was the best biblical explanation of the perpetual virginity of Mary I've ever heard in my life.
Thank you.
And it was, you need to put that on your YouTube channel just like I did on mine.
It's there.
Okay, boom. There you go. We'll put a link in the description. But all these things have come so full circle, man. But then the most beautiful thing about it, which I think is God is awesome. You were so afraid to make a big deal out of this to your church because you didn't want it to hurt people and you wanted just to keep it on the down low. And it is the most out there example of somebody becoming a Protestant pastor becoming a Catholic that I can think of in the last 10 years. You know what I mean? The reach of it in just this one thing that you did. And
okay, can I stop you for a second there?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so my ineptitude online. I'm just going to own it. It's not like I'm Mr. Online savvy guy.
I know that.
Is that really that big? Seriously, is it really that big?
Well, so I don't know all things obviously, but I remember back in the day, there was a guy named, I think it was Deacon Alex Jones. Mm-hmm. He was I think he was from Michigan. He was a pastor of a church. He converted and his entire church became Catholic with him. When I say his entire church, I mean, I don't know that it was to a person.
Yeah.
But it was a small church. Okay. But they basically said, we're all becoming Catholic. I have never heard of anything even remotely close to that happening until your deal. Where, 17/19 people just boom from this one church become Catholic like that. Now, maybe it's happened. I don't know. But to my mind, I can't think of anything like that. And then the way that it just got picked up and put out there to where you were almost like, oh, we got to keep this on the down low so nobody finds out about it. Now everybody's found out about it. How you like that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how I like it, but I guess I'm going to have to. It's a little bit mind blowing still, I guess, but you're right. There's a lot of, I experienced God's sovereignty through this,
yes.
In many different ways. Either you mentioned Father Aaron and talking with him, he was actually my resident expert. Well, actually, so what it was, you introduced us. Mm-hmm. And I think the initial connection there was that he's also a major Lord of the Rings fan. And that I just felt a connection with him because of that.
And his name's Aaron.
And his name's Aaron, but I got Aaron Gorn before he did. Yeah. So at any rate, I would come up against things when I'm reading in the Catechism, and I don't know whether to I don't know whether to circle it, box it, or triangle it. I'm not sure. I don't even know what this means, Mm-hmm. So I would kind of make a list of things that I wanted to talk about, and he became my resident Catholic expert to try to explain, okay, here's how I'm understanding what the Catechism is saying here. Where am I wrong? What am I misunderstanding here? That's how that started. But because of those conversations, we also, we talked about some other things too, and he knew that I was worn down as a pastor, and we talked about some kind of shared experiences and commonalities. And at one point he said to me, in your situation with what you're going through, I'm reminded of what Moses said to Israel when they were up against the Red Sea with Pharaoh and his armies coming hard behind them. And he said, the Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. And that's Exodus 14:14. At one point in this whole crazy journey, when Cami and I are not able at all to talk about these things, she comes home from this craft store, knick-knack store. I don't know. It's a women's home decor store kind of a thing.
I love those stores.
Oh my goodness. The gravity picks up when I'm in one of those. But she comes home and she has these different things that she's got. It was a clearance sale and all of this stuff. And the last thing she shows me is this big metal wall hanging that is, the Lord will fight for you. You need only be still.
Yeah.
And so that verse, and there's more I could say about that, but that verse that theme, that principle, that reality is woven throughout. It's woven throughout, and it's woven throughout as recently as our trip here today. Listening to something together, there it was again. Over and over and over again, we have seen the Lord fight for us. And really, we've only needed to be still. Not that there aren't things we've needed to do at certain points along the way, but we've not known what in the world was going on half the time. You know, we see maybe one step ahead, and that's it. We can't see what's beyond that. But as we've taken that step, he shows us the next step, and he takes care of us while we're there. He keeps showing himself faithful, and that's we've lived that and experienced that, and it's been remarkable. We never would have guessed that this is where we'd end up.
Well, as you said earlier, stuff started to happen.
Yeah, stuff started to happen.
It still is happening.
Yeah.
So let's kind of end with that. What's happening? Like, what are you doing now? And do you have a sense of what that next step is for you?
The next step, as far as I know it, is to simply keep saying yes to the opportunities that God gives me. I am not and haven't been working anywhere, but I've had thoughts. I've had different things that I wanted to do, and this post on X kind of led to things like you said. We changed the schedule of when you and I were going to talk, and any other opportunities like that. I know that I just need to say yes when those opportunities come up. I've told you before, I feel like I'm in a state where I'm not free to say no, where I've had opportunities to talk with different people. You mentioned someone to me. There's been others as well. I get the phone call. I get the email. I may not feel like it at that moment, but I know I'm not free to say no. I know this is what God wants me to do right now. So number one, God wants me to be willing to give my time and to spend talking with or talking to whoever he puts in my path. That's one of the things I've got right now. Through some other things going on, some of these families, our friends who have come in, they're having their own conversations right now. They're getting their own questions that they ask us, which isn't surprising. And they, at one point, a couple of comments were made like, can Aaron just write a book that shows us how to do what he did to us, that has point to this passage, this scripture, how this, and I'd already actually been thinking about trying to write something because writing is something I enjoy. I consider myself a better writer than a speaker. So I thought writing probably is something that I'm going to be doing. I'm just not sure how. But as you said early on in this, when you first become Catholic, you need to just take some time to be Catholic. And so I'm thinking it's really not my place to try to write a book. I'm not a Catholic expert. I'm not a Catholic theologian. I'm not a Catholic apologist. I'm just a guy who became convinced. But when these comments started coming in from these friends of ours, I thought, well, I could probably do that. I could write my own story and the conversations, the things that were convincing to me, the things that have become convincing to other people, and I could put that into a book, which is basically what I've been working on now for a couple of months. And it's close to done. And I should call it a manuscript. It's a bit presumptuous to me to call it a book. It's not a book yet. I hope that it will be. So that's something I've been working on. But just being available, just continuing to talk with other people, just be Catholic. We go to daily mass as often as we can, trying to live into that. These are the types of things that I'm doing right now. At some point, maybe / probably doing something on YouTube, and
you have a Substack though.
I do have a Substack. That's true. I've been starting to, someone encouraged me to do that.
Very smart person.
Very smart person. Might even be in this room.
Maybe, possibly.
Yes. Encouraged me to start a Substack, to start kind of.
A Substack is a blog.
Down.
For people who don't know, it's a place where you can share your thoughts. And I would tell you guys, I linked it in the description. Go subscribe to Aaron's blog. go check it out and support him. Like, you can do that. You can get the free version, or you can do that and support him financially. I would encourage you guys to do that. You know, when these guys like Aaron and like others, you know, myself, whatever, we quit our jobs. It's not like, all right, how do we become like professional Catholics now? Nobody does that, right? I mean, some people try, but nobody's like, okay, great. People are like, oh, you just want money. Nobody's getting rich doing this. Well, at least we're not. And the amount of sacrifice that has been made, you know, is huge. So if there's something like that people could do to help, I just encourage people to do it. So you've got the Substack.
Yeah.
You're going to put this book together at some point in time, maybe some YouTube stuff.
Yeah.
And what's so cool about this is that you mentioned in the very beginning of this, I'm not an expert. You know, I'm not a social media and it's like when the Lord fights for you, the Lord posts for you. The Lord does everything for us if we just let him be in the driver's seat and are obedient to do, because he put that on your heart, but you still had to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he did. And it was, you know, I think the thing that really got me to do that was just my excitement for these families too, because it's just not something that, it's not how I typically post anyway. I look back at that as like, that's just not what I would normally have said anyway, but I did because I was excited for them and I wanted to be able to kind of increase the joy of the night and tell them, hey, I got 75 people to say welcome home.
You've got like a few 100,000.
Yeah, it was nuts. It was absolutely nuts. But yeah, it's been a wild ride. That's what I started with in that post. I said, it's been a wild ride, and it still has, and it still is. We're very thankful. Sometimes we feel like we need to buckle up, but it's good. It's wild, but it's been good.
Amen. Well, you guys are just getting started, and it's been one of the most encouraging things I've experienced in my faith watching this all happen, and I'm getting a kick out of it. It's just been amazing. I love seeing people get excited about the church. I love seeing people get excited about their faith and seeing God move. And man, it's just been a privilege and an honor for me to be a part of it. One of the other things as we close here that happened in this whole process that really stuck with me was, I don't know if you even remember this. I think you came to daily mass. We went to lunch.
I know right what you're going to say.
And because I'm, Mr. Catholic guy, I said, let's pray. And I said, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And then you went, hold on. And then you said, bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, which we're about to receive from thy bounty through Christ our Lord. And we prayed that prayer together, and then we made the sign of the cross. And I was like, you know that? And you basically, I don't remember what you said, but you talked about the unity that we experienced in that moment. And, you talked about how great it was that we didn't have to fight.
Yeah.
I felt that. Because I'm so used to fighting, dude. I'm so used to, when I became Catholic, it was all, everybody, and people still just want to fight. And it was such a joy for me to feel like you and I can connect on this. And believe me, you being Catholic was the furthest thing from my mind at that point in time.
Same.
But the fact that it began with that we didn't had the fight, and we had more in common than we even realized, and now I think about how much more is there, and it just makes me thankful, man.
Yeah.
It just makes me thankful.
Same. I was thinking about that restaurant on the way up here today.
Were you really?
I was. I don't even remember where it is or what it's called, but I know I could find it if I know generally where it is. But yeah, I was thinking about that.
Pretty cool.
Is that where it started? It's probably not where it started, but it was a moment. It was a mile marker along the way. I think that even though it wasn't on my mind then, but yeah, no, that moment sticks out for me as well. And, I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you and thanks to Estelle as well, because you guys have been a great, great support to us. We were on the phone with you for quite a while on that vacation down in Florida.
I remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember.
So even though you've kind of developed an annoying habit of using my own words against me recently.
Yep. I'm going to continue to do that.
I don't give you permission, but no, it's been good. We love you guys and we appreciate you, and you've been a vital part of this journey as well.
Well, all glory to God, all glory to God, and I know that where He takes all of us from here is going to be so amazing. And I just want you to do me one favor. I want you to pull whatever strings you have to do, whatever you have to do to get your wife to agree to sit right there at some point in time so we can have her side of the story.
We can talk about that when we go upstairs. How about that?
All right.
Yeah,
awesome.
No, sounds great. I would love that.
Awesome. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Catholic Feedback with Keith Nestor. Send in your questions or comments to feedback@catholicfeedback.com. Catholic Feedback is brought to you by Stewardship, a Mission of Faith, and our generous supporters on Patreon, locals, and donations through our website. Catholic Feedback is a production of Down to Earth Ministries. For more information or to bring me to your parish or event, please visit our website at downtoearthministry.org. That's down, the number 2, earthministry.org. See you next time.